When I put out the telepathy tapes in 2024, I didn't put any ads on it. But since then, this endeavor has evolved into a full-time job. We're producing a season 2, and we just rolled out the talk tracks. And I've been excited to finally hire a staff in order to help me make those things happen. And we've just had to grow in a way that I was never anticipating. And so, in order to pay for this, we are turning on ads. But that is a critical piece in being able to continue this work so that those of us doing the research and working to bring these episodes to you are getting paid for our time. So thank you so much for understanding as we move into this new phase of the telepathy tapes and the talk tracks. Hi, everyone. I'm Ky Dickens, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the talk tracks. In this series, we dive deeper into the revelations, challenges, and unexpected truths from the telepathy tapes. The goal is to explore all the threads that weave together our understanding of reality. Science, spirituality, and yes, even unexplained things like psi abilities. If you haven't yet listened to season 1 of the telepathy tapes, I encourage you to start there. It lays the foundation for everything we'll be exploring in this journey. We'll feature conversations with groundbreaking researchers, thinkers, non-speakers, and experiencers who illuminate the extraordinary connections that may defy explanation today, but won't for long. On this episode of the Talk Tracks, I'm joined by Suzy Miller, a visionary educator and pioneer in the field of multidimensional communication. As the founder of the Awesomism Practitioner Process, Suzy has spent decades helping non-speakers and neurodivergent individuals unlock new ways of integrating their bodies and connecting with the world. What I love is that her work challenges conventional assumptions about communication and takes in stride that telepathy is a baseline form of communication for all people. For those of you who listened to the telepathy tapes, Suzy was a beloved guide and subject from season 1. But for those of you who need a refresher or just a clean introduction, Suzy, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
I was a pediatric speech-language pathologist, graduated with my master's degree in 1986 when there was absolutely no information about autism because it was 1 in 10,000. And in 1999, I had an encounter with a 4-year-old boy diagnosed with autism. Really one of the first, maybe first or second kids I'd ever seen with autism. And when I met him, he walked right up to me, looked me in the eyes and said, "Master." And when he said master, I was like going, who's the master here? Like what's going on? And I took him into the back of the daycare center to work with him, but, be his speech pathologist. But when I got back there, he was walking around and he was saying, it's the millennium, it's 1999. He was just mimicking this. But as he was doing that, I saw what I now know was his light body floating above his physical body. And they were completely detached, except for a little tail that was hanging off of his foot and dipped down into his light body foot and dipped down into his heart. And I kept trying to get it to go away and it wouldn't go away, Ky. So I was asking myself, like just in my head, I didn't say it out loud. I was just like, oh my God, what am I seeing? Like what's going on? And I hear this little boy's voice in my head. And he said, that's my light body. You're here to put my light body back into my physical body. And he took me through a year-long process. And at the end of that year, he was completely verbal. He was, communicative and purposeful in his verbalizations and has been ever since.
And Suzy, when I think about your gifts, it's really about how effectively you've helped non-speakers or those with apraxia, which for those new to this, that's people with a mind-body disconnect, how you've helped them integrate their body and their mind. And we're getting on our side hundreds of emails from parents wanting to support their children who are really dysregulated or having a hard time, controlling their bodies. But one of the things I love is that many of the supports and tools that you suggest can help all of us. Everything you've ever said that can help the non-speakers is really true just for any human being. So before we jump into some of the tips and wisdoms and tools that you can share, I'm just curious what type of questions you've been getting or how your life may have been impacted since the release of the telepathy tapes. And the reason that's really interesting to me is that you've kind of known about this information for decades and you've been helping thousands of people who've known about it as well. So what's it like now that it's kind of, out in the world?
Well, number one, every single client that I see, no matter where they're coming from in the world, has seen the telepathy tapes. It's very rare that one of my clients has not picked it up one way or the other. And if they haven't, I'm introducing them to it. But, a lot of times they're asking the similar questions to what they've been asking all along, if I'm honest, which is, how do I support my child in being more present? How can we help them get in their bodies? How can we help them feel more comfortable and be regulated?
And I know that you've said these questions don't just come from parents, but speech language pathologists and teachers and occupational therapists and that type of thing. So if you could just give some top line tips for everyone, what would they be?
I think that the first thing we really need to remember is that these kids are more tuned into the subtle world than they are into the physical world. I mean, clearly, if you look at a child diagnosed with autism, they don't look like they're here. Sometimes they're talking to things that we can't see or interacting in ways that we don't really understand. And so I think first and foremost, we need to understand that they are more tuned into subtle worlds. And if they're more tuned into subtle worlds, like, what does that look like for us? So one of the things that the kids said a long time ago is the very first field of energy that we can interface with is the emotional body field. So on the one hand, that's great, right? The emotional body field, we can make a connection heart to heart. We can connect that way. But on the other hand, most human beings' emotional bodies are a little bit dysregulated, to say the least. And especially if you take a parent who's just been given a diagnosis, or maybe they have a child that's long-term, already has had this diagnosis, they're under a lot of stress. I mean, a lot of stress. So we don't usually think about our emotional bodies. But what I've seen work over and over, it's almost miraculous the way it works, is when parents really start finding ways to support and regulate their nervous systems, whether it's through breath work or whether it's through maybe a little bit of inner child work, or it's just having love, compassion, and understanding for themselves as they're going through this process. What ends up happening is their systems regulate, and the children who are tuned into every single vibration that's going on with that parent notices that regulation, and guess what happens? They start regulating in their bodies as well. Behavior is the highest form of communication, right? We know that. We know that even as verbal speakers, we can say something, but that doesn't mean anything if our behaviors are completely opposite of what we say. So I tell parents, look at the behavior of your child. If your child is frustrated, overwhelmed, crying, banging their head up against the wall, what does that behavior look like? The moment you see the behavior, just gently, compassionately asking ourselves that question, it's like, well, where might I be that frustrated? And I'm not placing any blame on parents whatsoever. I'm just saying that if we can use the children's behaviors as information, as to things that we can explore within ourselves, you'll see almost an instantaneous transformation in that behavior. The other thing the kids have always said is, we don't really care how our parents feel. We care that they know how they feel. Because if they know how they feel, then we don't feel like we have to show it to them. We don't feel like we have to help them regulate. And to me, this is all about creating environments where these kids can regulate as easily as is possible.
And, I love that. And for me, that was actually one of my most earth-shattering discoveries. I mean, of course, discovering that individuals could read minds, but more importantly is that we're all kind of attuned to reading each other's feelings, right? Like there is this deep sense of knowing if someone is in a sad or dark or angry space. That energy, it can be like palpable. And if we can kind of clean up our own energy, it will affect everyone around us. So I just think that's such an important baseline tool for all of us. And another thing I'd love for you to talk about is in episode 5 of the Telepathy tapes. You told the story of helping Riley to tune his, spirit self with his body self by using different tuning forks, and that he was able to absorb information if he was wrapped in a color like a fabric silk. So are those things that you've seen work in other cases and that works often?
So the very first child, Riley, that I met in 99, as part of that year-long process to help him integrate, he would ask me to bring in tuning forks. And the reason he asked is he was saying, like, my soul has one vibration and my human experience has another vibration. And the challenge is that one's much higher than the other. And that's what's causing dysregulation in my body. That's what's making it difficult for me not to flow communication or regulate my body. So he suggested to me that I bring in these tuning forks. And basically all I was doing was playing a game with him, is like hitting it. And he would tell me, yes, that's the one. Yes, that's the one. And then I would say, okay, one for the soul, one for the body. And so we would just keep going until we found the two that were accurate. And then he would have me hit those at the same time. So now we're reverberating those two fields together. So in that case, it was really supportive for him. He actually then asked me to do that with my mouth to make the sound. And I was like, oh, now I can do it. But man, at the time I was freaked out. But yes. So if we think about, there's one vibration that is higher than the other, and any way in which we can merge those vibrations, that's great. So tuning forks is a great way to do that. But again, in that scenario, it's going to require that you have a child who can give you information back about which tone feels right. I always say, yes, bring the tuning forks in, but ask the kids, is this something you want to play with? What I know after thousands of kids, Ky, is that they know what they need. We just have to find a way to ask what they need. And whether that's through telepathy or through spelling, once you ask them what they need, if you follow that, that's where you're going to get the most success in their ability to integrate.
That brings up a great point, because there are so many parents who are really struggling because their child is not yet on the boards or isn't communicating through spelling, right? And a lot of parents have been writing to us saying that they fear their child is too dysregulated to ever learn to spell. And they're seeing kids spelling and thinking, that's never going to be my kid. But the truth is, that I found, is that when you talk to the parents of those spellers, they'll say, oh no, that was my kid at some point as well. I never thought they could spell or they could regulate in a way to get this out. So what's your advice for those parents who fear their children might not ever be able to regulate their bodies enough to be able to communicate?
I truly believe that every single autistic individual is able to learn to spell. It's really just a matter of first creating an invitation for them to be maybe a little bit more present in their bodies so that they can go about pointing and spelling. I mean, if you have a child 24/7 that's screaming and yelling and doing things that most kids don't do as repetitively as these kids do, you're just managing, right? Most people are just managing. It's really just a matter of first creating an invitation for them to be maybe a little bit more present in their bodies so that they can, go about pointing and spelling. So how do we do that? We do that by creating environments that are soothing. If we can take time to settle back into ourselves, if we can give ourselves a moment of peace, a little moment of meditation, getting outside and connecting with nature, even listening to music that just uplifts our frequency a little bit, choosing to pay attention to things that are lighter in nature instead of heavier. And it does take some practice if you've been in that world of management. But the minute we start lightening up, every single time it will lighten up these kids.
Is belief in your child or student essential for them to really spell and integrate and evolve into the person they can be?
Absolutely. Again, these kids read minds. It really is helpful to just believe in the capacity. instead of making statements, starting to have questions. And if we just, even just a few moments a day, kind of go, well, I wonder what else is possible. That starts to loosen up the energy a little bit. It starts to loosen up what we're broadcasting, and the kids feel it immediately. The other thing that I have told, especially teachers over the years, and this works just as well for a parent as it does for an educator, take the child and write down what they typically hear themselves say about the kids. Like, these are all the words that I use to describe this child. They get a really good idea of what kind of information is being broadcast to the kids all the time. These kids read minds. They're paying attention to those thoughts. And if we just, even just a few moments a day, kind of go, well, I wonder what else is possible. Well, what if it can be this instead of that? Instead of making statements, starting to have questions, even just a few moments a day, kind of go, well, I wonder what else is possible. That starts to loosen up the energy a little bit. It starts to loosen up what we're broadcasting, and the kids feel it immediately. So we can write that list of all of those words that we use to describe these kids, and then flip it over and write the list that you wish you could use. What are those words that you would really like to be able to say? Oh, he's so joyful. He's so excited. He's learning so well, whatever those things are. And just read it. Wake up in the morning and read it. It just resets the expectation for the day. And it's really amazing what can happen when just that subtle change is made.
Is there anything that you haven't talked about or that I haven't asked that is always kind of like a top tip that you give parents or teachers when they reach out to you for a consultation or a meeting?
I think that the other side of this, Kai, is how many people actually ask a parent, how is this for you? What is this like? What are you actually feeling? I mean, there's very little opportunity for these parents to be able to share what the experience is actually like. And not only that, they're constantly having to push to get their child the services they need. So it's like full on warrior mode, from pretty much diagnosis throughout their lives. And so I usually start a session with just like, where are we? How are we feeling? What's going on? Just starting there, I think, is huge. The other thing that I will say is the kids also suggest often that parents just take care of themselves. And I know that sounds like, it sounds like a nice thing to say. And sometimes it can even sound kind of patronizing, in some ways. But think about it. If the parent never has a break, if the parent never has an opportunity to go have a cup of coffee with a friend or go do something, then that parent is going to be stressed. And if that stress is what's being broadcast from the parent, then the child is going to be a little bit more dysregulated. I get a lot of kids to say, Mom, be nice to yourself. Mom, love yourself. Give yourself some credit. You're doing an amazing job. Those kinds of moments really need to be recognized.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So, so important. And another concern I've heard from parents or teachers is that sometimes their child will be explosive as far as their communication goes, right? They're open, they're communicating a lot on their letterboard or talker, and then something will happen and it's like they digress and they go into a period of just deep withdrawal and what I call cold communication, where it's almost like the progress just ceases. And I've received the question about, how do I help my speller start communicating again? And I'm not an expert in that, but you are. So I'm wondering how you would answer that question.
I think number one is the minute they go into that space of not communicating anymore, to see that as part of their integration process instead of seeing it as something wrong. And I know once you've got communication with your kid, you just want it to keep going on and on. But there does seem to be a little bit of an ebb and flow where the communication is just flowing, they're regulated, they can move that information right out through the board. And there can be other times when there's so much information that's starting to come in that they just start to back up. And it's not a bad thing. It's almost like they're trying to self regulate or self soothe in that regard. The other thing that I do see a lot too is sometimes when a lot of information starts coming through, of course, we're so excited that we start asking a million questions and we want more information. And sometimes that excess of excitement energy is enough to kind of go, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. It's like, that's too much. I can't do it. So they will slow down that way as well. But it's a natural and organic part of the process. If we can stay out of the fear that they're regressing, then usually they'll move through that fairly quickly. And there are rare occasions, or maybe not so rare sometimes, where the kids do finally understand that they're being heard and seen and valued, and they get real excited about that. And they start sharing information that might be more than the parent is actually ready for or the spelling partner is ready for. And if they start saying something that might be a little bit, outside of the range of the norm, or then if they get that feedback that, ooh, that was too much, they might slow down that way as well. So there can be a variety of reasons, but we'll keep it in the context of it's all normal. It's all part of the process.
And I'd also love for you to talk about the external factors in a parent's life, right? Like if they're having job stress or marital problems or a bout of low self-esteem or something else that can also impact, from what I've experienced, openness around spelling or an inability to regulate. Is that something you'd like to speak to?
Authenticity of communication, I think, is huge. Most parents are really taught when you feel bad, you just tell your kids you're doing great so that they don't worry or that kind of thing. Where that might work for a neurotypical kid to a certain extent, doesn't work at all for somebody diagnosed on the spectrum because they're so privy to our inner worlds. As human beings, all of us, we need ways to regulate our own emotional bodies. We need tools in our toolbox to move through stressful times. Without those tools, we as adults revert back to our own fears and anxieties and stresses. And the minute that energy is up, then of course, somebody who's so tuned into the subtle worlds and that vibrational change, it's just they're getting an influx of that kind of energy and it's difficult to regulate. So if we're coming in and we've had a bad day, to actually just say that, to have the words actually match the feeling is so helpful for an autistic individual because then they're not trying to figure out that energy.
Gosh, that's so true. And we don't do it just with our kids, right? You do it with your spouse or partner or coworker. And I know for me, I do not like it at all when someone tells me they're doing great and I can tell they're not. And in a very subtle way, it can harm that relationship because there's that bit of like, you're not telling me the truth. And even if it's on a micro scale, it affects you.
And the other side of it is the opportunity to say, yes, I'm a little bit scared right now, or I'm a little bit overwhelmed. And this is hard. You're not saying you're making it hard. You're not pointing at your kids and making them wrong for it. You're just saying, I'm owning my feelings, and then we get the opportunity to show them, that no matter what feeling you're having, it's okay. A lot of kids on the spectrum, they don't like when people cry or they don't like when people have really strong emotion. I don't think it's the emotion itself. I think it's the fact that there's no way to deal with the emotion. And if we can just say, yeah, this is how I'm feeling, and I need to be by myself for a minute, or I need to. And a lot of parents say to me, oh, my kid's never going to leave me alone. They would never give me that space. But I always tell them, try it. Just say it out loud, own it. And usually that child all of a sudden changes and is trying to comfort that parent. And it's A-okay that they do that. They're really good at it.
And another question that comes up a lot from parents and siblings is, am I capable of telepathy? Can I unlock a telepathic relationship with my child, right? Like, spelling is amazing and beautiful, and I want every single individual who has apraxia to be on boards, but is telepathy accessible for all of us?
There's just an innate connection. I mean, we share DNA, we share behavioral experiences. So absolutely, telepathy is something that is very easy. But again, if we're stressed, if we're overwhelmed, if nobody has ever taught us to listen to our own cues in our body, how are we going to pay attention to some of those more subtle experiences? I'm all for getting the parents' support in regulating as much as they can, feeling as loved and nurtured and supported as they possibly can, because that in and of itself will open up the telepathy. Other thing I tell parents all the time is just say to your child, just verbally say, I would really like to enter your world. I'd really like to know what's going on for you. Can you find a way to help me open up? And usually when people verbally say that to their kids, of course, their kids are understanding every single thing that's being said. So whether it's through dreams or kind of an intuitive hit or literally hearing their child's voice, in their heads or in their hearts, sometimes you just have to say that that's what you want. The minute the child knows that you're open and receptive, I promise you they're going to find ways to make that connection happen. That's music to their ears.
Yeah, and one of the most delightful messages my team gets nowadays is that a parent or teacher will write and say, oh my gosh, I listened to the telepathy tapes with my child, or my student listened to the tapes, and now they're opening up about this ability. And we tested it, and sure enough, they can do it too. They can read minds. And I think there's a truth to knowing that if someone is receptive and open to all of you in your full authenticity, and you won't be mocked or dismissed or laughed at or even at worst feared, you're much more willing to explore something with someone and be open about it and show those parts of you. Would you agree with that?
It's true. And the other thing that happens too, Ky, is if you have a child who's not verbally communicating back to you, not giving you that feedback, I mean, it's human nature for us to stop talking too. Like we literally stop verbally communicating. And I tell parents all the time too, is like, just say out loud, what you're noticing. So I notice that you're looking up at the ceiling all the time and you seem to be seeing something that I can't see. I wish I could see that too. Or I know that there's a lot going on inside of you. And I know that you have all your own thoughts and your own feelings and your masteries and everything else. And as your mother, as your parent, I really wish I could be part of that world. You're making these sounds. And every time you make those sounds, my body feels like this. This is amazing feedback. It's not until we start literally saying back to them, this is my experience of you. This is what it looks like from my vantage point. What's going on for you? Can you help me clarify that? The moment that that opportunity is opened up, I promise you that these kids are going to find a way to make that connection happen. And it happens in the most unusual ways sometimes. And you talked about it in the telepathy tapes through dreams and like literally hearing the kid's voice in your head. So yeah, they'll find a way, especially when they know that we're trying.
One of the most confounding things that I found over the past few years is that teachers seem to be more effortlessly able to engage in this two-way telepathy than parents. And I wonder if you've noticed that and why it might be. And if it has something to do with just the natural, intense, emotional, expectations that we put on kids, right? Like if I'm watching one of my kids playing a basketball game and they're not boxing out or going for the rebound. Like I'm having an agonizing experience internally. But if another kid's not doing that, I don't care. I think, oh, well, they're 5, of course, they're just learning. But with my kid, I won't necessarily let my kid know, but I'm definitely like, oh gosh, why? And so could that be why just this thing that parents drape over our children unknowingly? Because it seems like in order to get to that space, you have to be totally empty and free and clear without any attachment or expectation.
Over the years, I've had a lot of parents say to me, especially when they're really hurting, they'll say, well, you're not the parent of a child diagnosed with autism. And so you can't possibly fully understand. And no, I can't fully understand the day to day, but the benefit of having a little bit of distance and being able to look in, and to look in with a loving and compassionate heart, because I do adore these kids, that I think that opportunity is to kind of be able to stand back. It's just not the same as that parent that, what comes up? Like fear, guilt, shame, why is this happening? What is this about? There are all kinds of that kind of energy. And we can understand it. But the fact is that energy absolutely can get in the way of making those kinds of connections.
Yeah. And Suzy, one of the things that led me to you was your incredible book, Awesomism. And for those who haven't read it, how would you explain your book, Awesomism, in your own words? And what are some of your favorite takeaways from the book?
Awesomism really takes a look at capacity. It takes a look at all of those funny behaviors that for a neurotypical mind, you look at that and you kind of go, that's different, that's weird, that's odd. But what Awesomism does is it breaks down all of those different behaviors, whether it be toe walking or flapping or screaming or anything in between, and just normalizes it. These are all behaviors that are attempts to be in this world with all that they are. And it also really steps into the awareness that these kids are really coming in support of collective human evolution. They have capacities that we haven't yet grown into. They have a level of heart and compassion and patience that I don't think most of us could even really fathom. And they're bringing this into the world right now for a very specific reason. They're helping us evolve. So Awesomism touches on all of that and kind of provides some really practical applications and techniques for moving through a lot of that energy.
And if someone wanted to have a private consultation or sign up for a workshop or do one of the group lessons that you offer, how would they find you?
The website is SuzyMiller.com, and I'd highly suggest that they sign up for the newsletter. I send out a monthly newsletter. It lets everybody know what's on offer every single month.
Yeah, that's a great resource. So any closing thoughts, Suzy? What do you want to leave us with?
These kids are always going to evolve us. They're always going to invite us to more. And so it can also be very humbling to recognize that the information that they hold as a collective, each one of them holds information individually. But the information that they hold as a collective is so much bigger than any one of us. When they say it takes a village, it takes a very big village in order to, just engage with all of the different aspects that the kids are bringing forward. So I think keep an open mind, keep an open heart. As we do that, we can really begin to learn from the kids. Just stay open and stay curious. Ask questions. You'll be amazed at the ride these kids can take you on.
Well, thank you so much, Suzy, for your wisdom and your gifts and the ways that you are continuing to impact the world. And that's it for this episode of the Talk Tracks, but we'll be back a week from Sunday. And in our next episode, we'll explore precognitive abilities and the nature of time and even time travel. So stay tuned as we work to unravel all the threads, even the veiled ones, that knit together our reality. Please remember to stay kind, stay curious, and that being a true skeptic requires an open mind. Thank you to my amazing collaborators. Original music was created by Elizabeth P.W., original logo and cover art by Ben Kendor Design, the audio mix and finishing by Ben Campafrida, our amazing podcast coordinator, Jill Pachesnik, my amazing assistant, Catherine Ellis, and I'm Ky Dickens, your writer, creator, and host. Thank you again for joining us.